Hello and welcome back to the Brussels Signal studio. We are very happy to have Ambassador Tigran Balayan of Armenia, the ambassador to the European Union and also Belgium, if I'm not mistaken.
And Luxembourg.
Welcome back, and Luxembourg. Mustn't forget Luxembourg. Welcome back to the studio, Ambassador. This is a great moment to have you here again because there have been border clashes. We're talking about the ongoing tensions between your country and Azerbaijan. As you know, last week we had the envoy of the Azerbaijani president, Mr. Aliyev, here in the studio. That was Mr. Amirbayov, who he came in the day after 4 of your soldiers were killed in a border clash. He gave us his version of events as to what actually happened. My first question to you is, how do you see what happened last week?
So, first of all, thanks again for the invitation after our meeting in September. This is the second time I'm coming to this studio, and thank you for giving this to present our views on the developments. And I would like to underline from the outset that our views, our approaches are shared by the European Union, by the United States, by Canada, and other democratic countries. While the views of our opponents are shared only by few countries in the world, and we can count them on fingers of just one hand. Those countries who support and share the views of Azerbaijan. What happened? It was, after and before each aggression, there is a certain pattern. First, there is an information war information preparation of any aggression by Azerbaijan, and then we see actions on the ground, attacks, violation of the ceasefire, killing of people, and each times they went away with all these consequences. And exactly the same happened. What happened basically? For a week, there were in the media, in Azerbaijani media, which is all state controlled, because all the remnants of the free media in Azerbaijan were put in the jail and closed just at the end of the last year and the beginning of this year, because before so-called elections in Azerbaijan on 7th of February. All the media was claiming that EU mission is something that is not contributing to the peace. They are spies, etc., etc., etc. Although the mission is only civilian and they are not located alongside the border. It is one of the lies that Ambassador Amirbayev voiced here. They are not located on the border. And then EU ambassador was summoned to the Azerbaijani Foreign Ministry with a formal protest was presented to him on the activities of EU mission. And the next day, they are organizing a provocation exactly on the spot where EU EMA has no access. Exactly on the spot.
Which spot is this? Just so that
in the south of Armenia, in the village not far from the Nerkinhand. By the way, this attack took place from the areas that were occupied by Azerbaijan in 2022, sovereign territories of Armenia, and then Azerbaijan claims to occupy for their own security. They are not denying it's Armenian territory. They call it conditional border. Although there is no conditional border, there is a border. There are borders that were recognized by Azerbaijan in 1991, reconfirmed several times in Prague, in Sochi, whatever. But now Azerbaijani dictator and his ambassadors are claiming it's as a conditional border. So basically, we have seen another provocation, and I see here also not a coincidence that this killing of Armenian soldiers, 4 of them were killed by snipers, but maybe different or one sniper, and then the Armenian position was attacked by a drone with an aim of destroying the position. This took place several hours before EU-Armenia Partnership Council in Brussels. So that was a message, not only to Armenia, but also to Brussels, that we basically challenge your authority, we challenge whatever you do with Armenia, and we don't care about any calls, any warnings of severe consequences or in case of the further aggression against Armenia.
Okay, now there are several differences between what you said just now and what the Azerbaijani envoy said here when he came in. First of all, the EU monitoring mission, is that the right way to describe it? Is it a monitoring mission?
It's a monitoring, it's a civilian monitoring mission.
Because according to the Azerbaijanis, the military people also came in.
It's false. There is no military. It's a civilian mission. There is a clear mandate of that mission. There is an agreement between Armenia and the European Union on the status of that mission. None of the members of the mission has any arm, has any military capacity on the territory of Armenia.
So no soldiers from any EU state can go in and look through their binoculars, because this is what the Azerbaijani envoy was saying. He was talking about this binocular diplomacy.
No, it's another narrative that I don't know why they have invented this. Yes, they are there to monitor the situation on the border, and they need not only their eyes to monitor the situation, although the movement of the troops along Armenia, inside the Armenian border, and on the Azerbaijani border.
But they're civilian, not military. That's what.
Yes, there is and this is very easy to check. You can just Google EU monitoring mission in Armenia mandate, and it's open source. It's on EU website. You can check it very easily.
And what you also just said now is this is not a static position.
Yes.
This is a patrol.
They have a headquarters in the town of Yeregnadzor in southern Armenia, and they have so-called local bases in the settlements, in the civilian settlements in Armenia. There is no static observation points. They are doing patrol. So far, if I'm not mistaken, it's up to 8 patrols daily. They have a Twitter account. You can follow them. They are reporting regularly on their patrols, on their missions. And also something that Azerbaijan, also Ambassador Amirbayev touched during his interview here, that delegations are visiting the mission. Yes, European delegations, and not only European, are visiting the mission and attending the patrols, but I see nothing contradictory here. The EU member states are financing this mission.
Okay.
And they have to also see with their own eyes what this mission does,
right,
and what is its mandate.
Right. Okay. Now, what about the snipers? You say your 4 soldiers were killed by snipers,
Yes.
correct? Now, the Azerbaijanis allege that prior to that, there was an Armenian sniper who injured one of their border guards. Is that true?
There is, according to Azerbaijani information, one of their border guard soldiers was injured. Armenian Ministry of Defense immediately announced that it is launching an investigation into the incident, trying to figure out what happened. If there was a shooting from Armenian side, was that provoked by Azerbaijani side or not? But they didn't wait, and that using this, all autocracies, they have this medieval mindset, we are going to retaliate. With retaliation, you are not going to reach an agreement. You are not going to reach a peace. This is the wording and the narrative of violence, not of a peaceful intentions. So instead of waiting for the conditions, for the results of this internal investigation, they have launched a full-fledged attack on this on the southern borders of Armenia from the areas, I'm repeating, occupied in 2022. And basically, the fact that Azerbaijan didn't face any consequence for violating Armenian territorial integrity, occupying Armenian sovereign territory, committing ethnic cleansing in September in Nagorno-Karabakh, is with full violation of all possible international commitments. That is why they are feeling emboldened to launch another attack.
Okay, I want to come on to that, but just let's finish up with this so-called sniper attack. So what you're saying is, at the moment, you don't know if there was an Armenian shooting of some kind from the Armenian side, because the investigation is underway. Is that what you're saying?
I take the claim of the Azerbaijani side that this guy was injured from the Armenian side as a fact.
Okay.
And based on that fact that is reported, that was reported publicly, our Ministry of Defense launched an internal investigation. So far, I didn't hear about any result of that investigation, possibly because the people who has to be interrogated were killed by Azerbaijan.
Okay.
But again, here there is a very, specific point here that I want to mention. So far, Armenia has proposed at least 3 tangible confidence-building measures to Azerbaijan. All of them were rejected. Withdrawal of the armed forces from the borderlines. Signing a non-aggression pact. Mutual control of the arms control kind of an arrangement. All of them were rejected. And we see, especially during last weeks, a huge inflow of very sophisticated armaments to Azerbaijan from, for example, the latest examples from Serbia, Israel, and Turkey.
Serbia, Israel, and Turkey.
The latest one, just
Right.
last 2 weeks.
Last 2 weeks. What kind of arms are we talking about?
We don't know, but we see that there are flights from military airports in Serbia to Azerbaijan, from military airports from Turkey to Azerbaijan, and from Israel to Azerbaijan. Most probably from Israel, those are drones, because 60% or 70% of Azerbaijani military hardware comes from Israel. Then Turkey and Serbia, they have announced the agreement about selling some sophisticated artillery equipment to Azerbaijan last year even, and now we see the deliveries.
Before we go into more detail on the build-up, the military build-up, the EU monitoring mission, according to the Azerbaijanis, is only in Armenia. Is that correct? Because
Yes.
they couldn't come to an agreement on monitoring on the Azerbaijani side.
Azerbaijan, there was a proposal, it was rejected, and the best way, I think, to have that, to have also the control, certain control, is to have the same monitoring mission on the Azerbaijani territory. And by the way, this is something that was told to Ambassador Amirbayev during his contacts, last week contacts in The Hague, Brussels, and Luxembourg, as far as I know.
Right, okay. So let's talk about the build. So what happens now? I mean, is the ceasefire over, in your opinion?
Not yet, but because exactly of the EU monitoring mission. Because now Brussels has its own eyes and ears on the spot, and they monitor what's going on. Who is initiating escalation. And it's not a coincidence that Azerbaijan has chosen maybe one of the unique spots where EUMA has no access to commit another act of aggression. By the way, and this is something that I told my colleagues in the EU, that we saw the warning of HRVP Borrell a couple of weeks ago after another bunch of aggressive threatening statements from Aliyev, that Azerbaijan will face severe consequences in case of further attacks. So we have another attack. Where are those consequences?
Well, I was about to ask you, what do you think of the EU response?
I think EU response was mild. Also, HRVP Borrell called that disappropriate or disproportional reaction. But I see Mr. Aliyev and his regime needs to see really actions, not words, because we had enough words before ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh, after that condemnations, but we don't see any real action, basically.
Right, and you've already alluded to military build-up on the border. This is based on your monitoring of military flights from the countries that you mentioned. Is there any other sign of a military build-up, troop movements, for example?
I didn't say that there is a military build-up on the border. I told that we see that Azerbaijan continues to arm itself heavily and bring in a lot of military hardware, equipment, missiles, whatever. And we have seen the same pattern several times. in 2020, before the attack to Nagorno-Karabakh against Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, we have seen this in 2022 before aggression against Armenia. We have seen this in 2023 before the final stage of the ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh. So there is a pattern. There is no still, according to the publicly available information, there is no military buildup alongside the border with Armenia, but they can be done within days, I mean.
Right, okay. But there is, Azerbaijan continues to purchase weapons, you say. Right, okay. And what about Armenia? Is Armenia purchasing weapons?
Of course. We have the right to defend ourselves, to protect 29,800 square kilometers of our sovereign territory. And we are purchasing arms, of course. There are some contracts publicly announced with France, for example.
Right.
But I don't want to go into details because this is the area I don't have any expertise, and I don't want to... I don't know the details, and this is an area of the national security that I don't want to voice. Another one also thing here, the same way that any dictatorship is denying the right of its neighbors to exist, the right of its neighbors to arm itself and defend itself, the same way Mr. Aliyev denies the right of Armenia to defend itself. I mean, if you see even the wording used that Armenia didn't exist, Armenia is an artificial state. Any sale of arms or any import of arms for Armenia, this is not contributing to the peace. This is something that is feeding the revanchist forces in Armenia. Like Azerbaijan has all the rights to arm itself, and Armenia has to be as weak as possible, not to be able to resist. This is the mindset that the narrative they are promoting.
Right. I mean, last time you came here, September, Armenia had just struck a deal with France, in fact, if I'm not mistaken. Have those arms started to arrive? Do you know?
According to publicly available reports, not from Armenia, there are some 20 or 15 armored vehicles that just arrived to Armenia. So far, I don't know any update.
Oh, so not much.
I don't know. I can cite only publicly available information. Okay. So far, we have seen that France has delivered about 15 or 20 armored vehicles, bastions, and that's it. I mean, I don't know further details.
Right. What do you expect to happen next, Ambassador?
Listen, on Saturday there was a EU German mediated meeting, Chancellor Scholz, between Mr. Aliyev and my Prime Minister, which is both sides evaluated the meeting as useful. But we have seen so many these kind of evaluations and useful meetings. But then Azerbaijan has violated every single agreement, every single accord reached during those meetings, and situation deteriorated. We need a mechanism of implementation of those accords. Even Mr. Aliyev went so far, from one hand telling, I mean, Mr. Amirbayev or Mr. Hikmet Hajiev, the two assistants of Aliyev, publicly telling we value EU mediation, and he told that also in the interview here, I see. But on the other hand, his boss is telling we do not need any mediator.
Right, they want it to be a bilateral issue.
Yeah, but now I see that Mr. Amirbayev says that, we are evaluating, we value the EU mediation, want to continue.
Right.
President Michel congratulated so-called elections of Aliyev. Also, I think, extending invitation to come to Brussels, but we have seen that since September, Aliyev basically, at least, I can remember 4 times refused to come to Brussels. And again, we have at least several accords within Brussels format announced by President Michel. Nothing impedes European Union to take those accords and follow up on their implementation on the Azerbaijani side.
When you say follow up on their implementation, what do you mean?
For example, elaborate a timetable on the accords. Still now, Aliyev refused to recognize Armenia's territorial integrity in 29,800 square kilometers.
This is the old Soviet border.
This is this.
Right.
This is this.
But according to what I heard, what they told me, the border is not well demarcated because it's an old Soviet border. Is that
It's
true?
not demarcated. That's true. It's not demarcated at all.
Okay.
At all.
Okay.
But nothing impedes us to take this map that we have presented to the UN, Azerbaijan has presented to the UN, and start demarcation with international experts, by the way.
Right.
Also EU experts and monitoring mission can also play a role here.
Right.
To start demarcation.
This would be as part of so-called peace talks or finding a definitive
Of course,
peace settlement,
of
right?
course, but now you know what Azerbaijan. Okay, I will tell this publicly. I mean, there is nothing to hide here. There was a agreement in principle in the draft peace agreement that the demarcation should be based on the maps from 1917 to 78, the latest updated map of the Soviet Union General Staff of Armed Forces. Then Azerbaijan proposed to put not 74, 78, but 74, 1990. We said no problem, those maps have no big difference, no problem. I mean, the latest administrative maps, not military maps, of the Soviet Union. Then, in the latest version, they have basically deleted the part of already article that was already agreed. And in 4 days, Ilham Aliyev announced that no, they don't want the demarcation to take place based on those maps that were agreed, by the way, within Brussels format. Another agreement that was reached in Brussels but not respected by Azerbaijan. And they want to base the demarcation or delimitation on the 1918-1920 maps of the first Azerbaijani Democratic Republic. But there is a issue here. In 1919, Azerbaijani Republic applied for the membership in the League of Nations. And the League of Nations refused to accept the application, citing exactly this reason, that the maps Azerbaijani government has presented are not corresponding to the real authority of that government on those territories. So basically they are now trying to revive the maps that were initially rejected a century ago by the League of Nations.
And these maps that you're referring to, they include territory within
They include
Armenia.
even, as far as I remember, they include not only this part of Armenia, but also this part of all the east of Armenia.
So this is a territorial claim, essentially.
They never seized, Azerbaijan never seized the territorial claims against Armenia. I mean, the government is financing this false and fake narrative of Western Azerbaijan, which never existed, and claims that all the territory of Armenia, including the capital of Yerevan, is an ancient Azerbaijani city. I mean, this is such a nonsense. I don't want to waste our time bringing counter-arguments, but this is exactly the irredentist policy of any kind of autocratic regime.
Okay.
Claiming Yerevan is an ancient Azerbaijani city, these parts are... this should be returned to Azerbaijan, etc. And again, another false narrative that Ambassador Amirbayev was trying to promote here. He says that Azerbaijan has nothing against Armenian sovereignty here, in the south of Armenia, that they want to have a land link.
Zangezur
It's
corridor.
a fake narrative. There is no Zangezur corridor. It's another manifestation of the irredentist narratives promoted by Azerbaijani government, and I strongly encourage you, do not use that wording, Zangezur corridor. It doesn't exist, and it will not exist under Armenian statute. But what they want, basically, they want unimpeded access without any customs control and territorial and administrative control. No passport control, nothing. This means basically extra territorial jurisdiction over Armenia's territory or part of Armenia's territory. We are ready to facilitate the access, etc. Having now the technical possibilities are allowing us to have these rapid passport scans, whatever, have the list and according to them. But they refuse it. And More importantly, they insist on the Russian control, Russian presence in this territory of Armenia.
Why Russian?
I mean, because they, this should be addressed, but to Azerbaijan, we see this as part of the Azerbaijani narrative to make Armenia as weak as possible, and also to use any possibility to destabilize situation in Armenia. Russian, because they cite the November 9 ceasefire statement. 9 points it has in that statement, but 8 other articles were ruined basically by Russia and Azerbaijan, including the complete ethnic cleansing of Armenians, the provision on Lachin corridor, the provision on the return of refugees, the provision on the preservation of cultural heritage. Another point, Ambassador Amirbayev says that Armenia launched numerous legal cases against Azerbaijan in the ICJ and the European Court of Human Rights. I have bad news for Mr. Amirbayev. We are going to launch also cases in the International Criminal Court. And this is something that Azerbaijan has clear problems with international legal order. It violates blatantly provisional measures, orders of the International Court of Justice. It violates the decisions of the European Court of Human Rights. So that is why they are afraid of the responsibility. And Armenia, basically by ratifying the Rome Statute, made this very important contribution to the international legal order. And we are going to use all possible legal means to hold the responsibles for the ethnic cleansing, for the war crimes, etc.
Who is responsible ultimately for the ethnic cleansing?
It's up to the court to decide who is responsible. I'm not a judge, I'm not a prosecutor. We are going to submit cases, as we have submitted to the ICJ.
Right.
So it's up to the court to decide who is the ultimate responsible. I have my personal, considerations, my personal views on that, but as an ambassador, I cannot voice them, unfortunately.
Ambassador, do you expect war?
As my Prime Minister put last Thursday during the government session, we clearly see that Azerbaijan has an intention not to end conflict with Armenia, but to continue it. We do expect that Azerbaijan can not resist the temptation of launching another acts of aggression against the Republic of Armenia. But when, I can't tell you. So far we see that despite all the calls warning, Azerbaijan didn't stop not only its aggressive rhetoric, but also aggressive actions. And the killing and provocation, a killing of 4 Armenian soldiers last week, and continued provocations are not giving much hope of us that Azerbaijan is going to restrain itself. And here I want also to mention our last conversation, which made headlines around the world. Exactly because of this kind of headlines and warnings, Azerbaijan didn't attempt to attack Armenia. That was basically something that was that the possibility was so high that we have seen that the able actors behind the scenes warned Mr. Aliyev that in case of attacks, he is going to face a lot of consequences.
Consequences, as far as I see here in Brussels anyway, the classic consequences are sanctions. I mean, if you look at, the EU is also funding the war in Ukraine, but I mean, these are the kind of consequences you're referring to. You're referring to sanctions, correct?
I'm referring to sanctions, but for the sanctions in the classical, in their classical meaning, need unanimity in the Council.
Right.
I think that EU has another tools that doesn't require unanimity in the Council, to start with them.
For example?
For example, several restrictions, suspension of several agreements, etc.
Okay.
Installing of the price caps. But also, as our time of interview comes to an end, I want to talk about the future also. About the future my government sees for Armenia and for the region. And this is the project of the Crossroads of Peace. And partly this is about also some points that Ambassador Amirbayev mentioned here about the connectivity. We presented this project, it's called Crossroads of Peace. And we want to turn Armenia from the apple of discord to a hub of cooperation and transportation and connectivity. Our ambition is to include this in the Global Gateway Initiative. And here we see that all the regional countries, including Turkey, can contribute to this. So far, we see reluctance from our eastern neighbors and eastern neighbors and western neighbors to engage constructively to implement this vision of regional cooperation that will benefit everyone. But we are determined to continue this, and we seek European Union support in implementation of this project.
Okay, I just have two more questions
Please.
for you. You mentioned that sanctions would require unanimity in the Council. Does that mean that there would be no unanimity in the Council if sanctions were proposed?
I don't know. It's up to member states to decide. But so far, as we see, there are certain reluctance from some member states.
Which ones, please?
I cannot name them. It's up to European Union colleagues to name them. But I mean, you know whom, of course, I have in mind. But we are working with everybody, with every single EU member state. We are working very closely, and we are working even with some countries that recently, basically a year ago, we have suspended diplomatic relations. We are working, and we are trying to present that reluctance to assist Armenia in expanding its defense capabilities and actually limiting the capability of Azerbaijan to finance its war machine will turn into another war. This is a task we have, and here again our message to the European Union is the following, that was told by my minister also during last week's Partnership Council, that we have to differentiate EU-Armenia cooperation and the peace process. There are two different tracks. We are very grateful to President Michel, and we are committed to this format. But the one shouldn't preclude the other one, or it shouldn't prevent the other one.
They're separate tracks.
Yeah, helping Armenia to expand, to develop, it basically promotes the peace process, and vice versa.
Understood. And my final question is on Nagorno-Karabakh, which I was told last week has now been renamed the Karabakh region by the Azerbaijani government. What is the situation there today? Are there any ethnic Armenians still living in the region? Are there any of those who were displaced by the fighting who have sought to return? What's the latest, please?
Okay, if it was renamed, this land, this piece of land was called Artsakh for centuries, and the Armenian name, and it's basically not administrative decisions that are defining the names of the geographical locations. That is the people who live on these territories that are naming their homeland. So far, Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh who were ethnically cleansed are calling this geographical location Artsakh. And Nagorno-Karabakh is internationally recognized name, and it's not up to Azerbaijani administrative authorities to decide how to call it and then to instruct journalists or civil society how to call it. Yes, there were attempts for some people to return. They were rejected by Azerbaijan, even visiting the cemeteries and tombs, and this is something very nasty, that now the war against Armenian cemeteries started in Nagorno-Karabakh. We have tons of video and photo evidence that basically they are starting to ruin the cemeteries in the villages. and also the churches, the small churches, they are destroying completely, as the case with the church of my native village in Nagorno-Karabakh. Basically, all the crosses from all Armenian churches in Nagorno-Karabakh were removed by occupying authorities. As concerns Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, there are about 19 or 20 ethnic Armenians living basically in prison conditions. Their Armenian passports were confiscated, and they are basically on the mercy of so-called Russian peacekeepers and some so-called volunteers. They are visiting them, but they are the people who basically has no place to go in Armenia, etc. And this is something, I mean, they put in the cages for show. Maybe they are taking some journalists visiting Nagorno-Karabakh to show you see, there are Armenians who decided to stay here and we keep an eye on them. No, this is not true, and under current situation, I don't see any possibility of Armenians to return to Nagorno-Karabakh under this oppressive regime. We need international guarantees, international presence, and full respect for the rights and security of Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians, as was also mentioned and was confirmed by the International Court of Justice Provisional Order. This is something that Azerbaijan has still to implement, and here again I see EU's role in pushing by all the toolbox it has for the full implementation of all ICJ decisions and provisional measures.
Does Russia still play a role? I know last time you came in here, you were disappointed at the lack of support from Russia. Does Russia play any role now in the region or not?
Yes, Russia plays a major role in the region. I mean, historically, Russia is present there, and historically, Russian presence that Armenia was heavily relying on during the whole period of its independence. But since 2000, especially 21, we have seen that Russia plays a role that is not in conformity with its contractual obligations. Namely, Russian peacekeepers had a mandate to protect Armenian civilian population in Nagorno-Karabakh, which they have failed. In the Russian parliament's decision on the deployment of the peacekeeping force, it's written that they are deployed to protect the population of Nagorno-Karabakh, which they have failed to do so. Russia still maintains a military base in Armenia. But we see that we have seen also through last years that Russia didn't bother itself to defend Armenian eastern borders, and according at least 2 legally binding agreements. And Azerbaijan has its head free to attack Armenia whenever it wanted. And even the latest provocation and the killing of 4 Armenian soldiers, we didn't hear any kind of condemnations from Russia.
Okay.
It was Russian soldiers, by the way, stationed in the vicinity. They have witnessed that. We see just, those both-sided statements. We call on the parties not to aggravate situations. So Russia is present. Russia will stay in the region. And this is, you cannot pull out Russians overnight, and it's not in anybody's interest. It will, any attempt to, undermine Russian interests in the region will bring to more violence. And Armenia certainly is not interested in more violence, and Armenia does everything possible to maintain good relations, good partnership with Russian Federation, despite certain differences, notably on Ukraine.
And how big is the military base?
According to contract, it's a couple of thousand soldiers here in Gyumri. In the north of Armenia, somewhere here, in the north of Armenia, but I don't know how many actual Russian soldiers are there.
Okay. Ambassador Balayan, thank you again for coming back to see us in the Brussels Signal studio, and please keep in touch. We'd like to have you here for a third time.
Yeah, and also when I will also maybe this is a request. This is actually when, as I told, it's our vision of the peace,
Right.
and the project that can bring really this long-awaited peace to the region. And maybe one of our conversations future conversations should focus not on the conflict, not on the differences, but about the possibilities that this project and other similar projects can open on the region.
Well, indeed. Let's hope that next time we talk, the violence will not be on the agenda.
Yeah.
That would be great. Okay, and thank you very much for watching.
Thank you. Appreciate it.